It is Friday, September 3rd. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright everyone, this is definitely one of the more busy weeks when it comes to PlayStation news, finally. It's been, a little dry there for quite a while, but let's dive right in. First up, as always, our PlayStation Plus reminder. The August games are still available, and this is your last call until they go away, because September 7th it will change over to Overcooked on PS5, Overcooked All You Can Eat, and then for PS4 you're getting Hitman 2 and Predator Hunting Grounds, which I think this is a solid month. I know there is some complaining going on, but I mean, you can't please everybody. I think what's problematic is that you've got 3 games here where they're a little bit more particular, I guess, like Overcooked. It's a great game when it's local co-op. Predator Hunting Grounds, it's an asymmetric multiplayer game that's also best with a group of friends. Hitman 2 probably has the widest reach here, but I think this is definitely a good month for sure, and one where there's a little bit of something for everybody here. Now, with that said, we can move on to PlayStation Now, where we don't actually have the proper September lineup, I'm assuming, but what we do have is a lineup of games coming on a rolling basis every single month in the Final Fantasy franchise. So this is pretty interesting. I hope they do this more frequently, but for the next five or 6 months, we're getting, it's Final Fantasy VII on September 7th, then Final Fantasy VIII Remastered October 5th, Final Fantasy IX November 9th, and then 10 and 10-2 HD Remastered December 7th, and then Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age January 4th, 2022. So we don't actually have the proper September lineup just yet, and I'm not sure how long these games are going to actually stay on the service. Normally, when they don't attach an expiration date to them, that means that they're going to be on the service indefinitely, which could look like, a few years, if that, which, I mean, that's kind of ideally. I would like to see PS Now go in that direction, right? And we've had this talk so many times, but if they're not going to do the big budget day and date releases, you need to start pegging PS Now as more of this proper legacy library of games where, they're older titles, but they're high quality titles and they're always there waiting for you, and you don't have to think in the back of your mind like, oh, I got to hurry up and play Final Fantasy VIII Remastered before it goes away in 3 months, right? Like, nobody wants to be put in that situation, but you're so much more compelled to subscribe if you know that you've got, 1,000 plus games and, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, moving on, just yesterday, Sony announced a handful of things, like, for example, the pre-order bonuses and the additions of the game that you can buy for Horizon Forbidden West, and normally this would be more straightforward, but there's actually a lot here to unpack, so I think to start off, we'll just kind of go over all the additions of the game that you can buy and what's included and what's not included, because that's the big point here. So first up, there's obviously going to be standard copies of the game, PS4, PS5, you know the deal there. There's also the Digital Deluxe Edition. This gets you a special pose and face paint for photo mode, a Apex Claw Strider strike piece. This is going to be some kind of little piece that's added on for what is a mini game inside of Forbidden West. They didn't talk too much about what this game is, but you'll get an extra little Claw Strider piece there. In-game resources pack, a digital soundtrack, digital art book, Karja Behemoth Elite outfit and shortbow, Nora Thunder Elite outfit and sling, the Sunhawk digital comic book, and Nora Legacy outfit and spear. Includes both the PS4 and PS5 versions. That one's like $80 USD. The special edition gets you either the PS4 or PS5 version on disc, you have to choose, with a steelbook, a mini art book, digital soundtrack, and the Nora Legacy outfit and spear. The collector's edition gets all the download content from the Digital Deluxe Edition, the steelbook with no disc, but instead a download code for both the PS4 and PS5 versions, a mini art book, and a Tremor Tusk and Aloy statue. This one's like $200 USD. The Regala edition, this one's $270 or I think $230 British pound sterling. All the deluxe content, art book, canvas map, replica, focus, and stand, machine strike pieces, 2 art cards, the steelbook, again, no disc, but a download code for both versions, and the Regala Tremor Tusk statue with the Aloy statue as well. What's problematic here is that first up we've got as sort of a minor issue, no discs included in the 2 most expensive versions of the game, which is really strange, and I know other publishers have done this before with, collector's editions where they have these trinkets and goodies and statues, a steelbook, and they don't include a disc, which is like, what are you doing? You're selling this to a collector. You don't think a collector wants, a hard copy of the game? So I guess Sony's going down that same route too, which is just so bizarre. I mean, yeah, they want you to buy the game again, but is that really necessary when we're selling a highly profitable version of the game where it's got, again, all those trinkets and goodies and a plushie? That's all high margin stuff. include the disc. So I don't get that. But if it was just that, I think, it would be a bummer, but people would overlook it like, all right, whatever, like, I guess I'll just buy the disc, or think about the collector's edition later or something if I can find it in stock, or whatever the case may be, right? The point of contention is the upgrade process, or the lack thereof, if you want to go from PS4 to 5. You can't actually do that. It's really weird. On day one, you have to decide right away, okay, I'm going to buy the Digital Deluxe Edition. At a minimum, $80. That'll get you both PS4 and 5. And over on the official PlayStation website, they actually published an FAQ, which they needed to do in the first place for this, which is also kind of weird, but they had to point out that there is no dual entitlement for the standard or special edition. If you want both, you have to buy the Digital Deluxe, Collector's, or Regala editions, and they also pointed out there are no plans for an update offer from standard to Digital Deluxe edition at this time. I don't get that. Like, okay, first up, yeah, it was definitely misleading from that PlayStation blog post prior to PS5 coming out, where it talked about, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Sackboy, and also Horizon Forbidden West, and it made you think that all those games had free upgrades. Now, 2 of them did, not Horizon. So, and if you read that, technically they do point out launch games, which Horizon is not one, but it's, the way it's worded, it's definitely misleading. I even thought at the time, like, oh, that should be a free game upgrade as well, but obviously where we are today, I kind of knew that this was like going to be a thing where, like, oh, they're going to charge for it. But, like, not even that. They're not even offering a way to pay after the fact, which for a lot of people, you may very well still be on PS4. You want to buy the PS4 version and upgrade after, right? If Sony's going to be in this direction where they're saying, yes, we're charging for some upgrades, or, we're going $70, if, they're going to do all these things, it's just interesting that this actually goes against, like, their bottom line. Like, why would you not want to have somebody be willing to pay the $20 difference at a minimum? I mean, then there's also the fact that if you want to make the comparable, which of course many people are doing, look at your competitor with their smart delivery, which, building up to PS5 and Series S and X launching, we kind of thought, oh, okay, that's, definitely like a marketing term. Sony has the same thing. And what's crazy is that they technically do have that system in place, right? Game upgrades work on PlayStation 5, and they largely work exactly how smart delivery works. Maybe that's like a hot take, but you put a disc in there, you can claim the PS5 version. It's not nearly as easy or as graceful, but inherently, like, a publisher can offer a free game upgrade on PlayStation if they want to, and it's generally speaking about as straightforward as how it is on Microsoft's platforms. Now, I just don't know why they're not going all in, right? They don't have to be as reactionary. They don't have to match everything Microsoft's doing. If Sony wants to, again, be in their lane, and if they care more about their bottom line and say we're charging for these games, and we see things like Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut debuting at number 1 on the UK sales chart, it's just, we can see how they're justifying it, but that doesn't make it right. So I don't really know why they're doing this. It's not the right move. It's not a great move. It's a really weird way to put all this information out there for this game. It doesn't need to be this confusing and complicated. It can be a lot more straightforward, but at the very least, this will only be a problem in the short term because we're in that cross-gen period. Once cross-gen is, like, gone, it's all PS5. So in that way, this won't be an issue. However, we should be expecting this, or some kind of similar treatment for Gran Turismo 7 and God of War. I would say absolutely, if we're looking at this now for Horizon, probably going to be something similar to those as well, unless Sony decides to backpedal on this, which I would ideally like to see them try and do something to improve the situation, although I wouldn't bank on that happening. Anyway, moving on to the much more exciting news of yesterday, which amazingly kind of got lost next to all the Horizon madness, but it's the confirmation of a new PlayStation 5 event showcase. Finally, all those summer months of saying soon was actually September 9th. A 40-minute showcase, 1 p.m. Pacific or 4 p.m. EST, 9 p.m. BST or 10 p.m. CEST. And again, 40-minute showcase includes updates from PlayStation Studios and some of the industry's most imaginative developers for games releasing this holiday and beyond. That's how the PlayStation blog puts it. And it also says to stick around after the presentation to get more updates from some of the studios featured in the showcase. So kind of like an E3 live stream or something where they're going to have developer interviews and things like that. So that's pretty cool. And they also point out PlayStation's next generation VR will not make an appearance, but there will still be plenty of great games for PS5 from developers large and small. So This is great. I like when Sony sets expectations, and for the next gen headset, I mean, appropriately that should have, I would imagine that's going to command its own separate event of like, 30, 40 minutes, because it really needs it. It's going to be kind of its own platform in and of itself, right? So that's good, and the running rumor for that is that we'll actually get a full showcase next year, early next year, so I wouldn't expect us to see that headset again for the rest of this year, which that's kind of okay, right? But when they say developers big and small, PS Studios and other developers. So remember, Sony's been doing a pretty good job here where they're setting expectations about what events will and will not include for State of Plays, as an example, right? They'll constantly throw out, there's no headset here, there's no Horizon, no God of War, no update from PS Studios. That's good. But on the flip side, and this is kind of how I thought they were going to do this, it's that State of Plays, you now know to modestly set your expectations, because those are kind of, again, 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes a State of Play is dedicated to one game entirely. But when we've got an event that's named something else completely different, like this, the PS5 Showcase, which this is now lined up with the showcase we had last year, which was called PlayStation 5 Showcase. And that one was actually 47 minutes, which is a good chunk of time. So there's enough in there to see a lot of exciting things, but remember that there is going to be 10, 15 minutes allocated to the smaller stuff, or, third-party developers, or things that you may not necessarily care about. We're not getting a 1 hour plus blowout E3 2015 with 3 to 4 to 5 megaton announcements. But there should still be some very exciting things in here, and that's the good news, right? Because they're not saying to not expect PlayStation Studios. They're definitely going to be here, so I would imagine we're finally going to see God of War for the first time, depending on what they decide to whip up. We just talked about this, but I feel like the first time we see the game, it's probably going to be in the same veins of how we saw Ratchet, GT7, and Horizon Forbidden West, where, well, technically that first trailer was all cinematic, but we should probably see some gameplay or a gameplay walkthrough of some kind. I think that would be great. If anything, it would be disappointing to have kind of a quick jump cutty cinematic thing. But there's that. There's obviously a handful of rumors going around about, some of these second-party games that, again, they're rumors, but they could show up here. But in terms of possible appearances, Forspoken, Final Fantasy 16, Call of Duty Vanguard, Grand Theft Auto 5 Expanded and Enhanced. Also trailers for Little Devil Inside or Kena Bridge of Spirits. Stray we just saw, so I don't think that's coming back here. Solar Ash we saw a good amount of, same with Sifu. Jet the Far Shore, also a trailer recently. And then, we've got The Last of Us remake and Factions, which those are probably further away. We'll talk about Factions in a second here. A Spider-Man 2 tease, that would be pretty interesting. The Firewalk partnership, that game is playable apparently and has been for a long time, so maybe that'll show up. New trailer for Ghostwire Tokyo, we only have one. Pragmata, that's slated for 2022. Guerrilla's multiplayer project. There's a lot of directions that this can go, and then also there's things that we just have no idea about, right? Sony's been somewhat good at keeping secrets, or at least more so than the Microsoft side of things, where it seems like a lot of what they do just comes out either weeks or possibly months in advance, or sometimes last minute. But there's definitely some things brewing within or throughout PS Studios that we may not have any good indicators for, and that would also be really exciting as well. But September 9th, can't wait. We'll probably do something to cover the event, and obviously that's a Thursday, so the following day is LTPS as well, so we'll have a lot to do on for those 2 days coming up. Moving on to our next news story, we've got a rumor here from the subreddit Gaming Leaks and Rumors. How lovely, so keep that in mind, 100% a rumor for now. But the rumor does state that Sony's building a brand new studio in Japan for AAA game development, which might sound a bit strange because they closed Japan's studio, but the original poster kind of breaks down what's going on here. So first, they claim that this is a source that provided info to the Housemarque acquisition, which they didn't completely confirm. So I guess what they did was they sent them a link to this video interview from the head of Diorama Studios, which does outsourcing work and things like that, and they worked on Returnal. And during this interview, which was a few months back prior to the Housemarque acquisition being confirmed, the studio head said that he can't talk because of NDAs, and he said more so because Housemarque's now under the PlayStation umbrella, so to speak. I remember seeing this at the time. I don't think we brought it up during LTPS, but that certainly raised some flags, and so I guess that's the proof, but that's an interview that was public to everybody, so Keep in mind that's apparently how this was supposed to be proven, and that's their source, the same source providing this. Anyway, this rumor claims that, and we'll just read the post verbatim here. It says, Sony's in the process of building an entirely new studio in Japan to work on big budget AAA games. Essentially, this studio is in the same veins as Microsoft's initiative, and apparently Sony wants this studio to make big hits that are both successful in Japan as well as in the West. In short, they want this studio to make IP in the scale of Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Devil May Cry, or Metal Gear. Source has told me they are hiring veteran developers from Capcom's Resident Evil team, devs from Square Enix, and even developers from Konami. Apparently, a lot of devs got laid off after Konami restructured earlier this year. They go on to say that Sony's been working on this since early 2020, and they were already going to do this alongside shuttering Japan Studio. And towards the bottom, there's an edit for another source that they have, which claims that we could hear about this in the coming months with a formal reveal of this project. Now, why do this when we had the shutdown of the Japan Studio original development team, right? Not Team Asobi, because they were doing fine and now they're getting more investment, but that's actually the rationale behind this. So really, when you look at this holistically, all things considered, it's very plausible, right? So it is a rumor, but this is the one thing that I think a lot of people seem to ignore when it came to the shutdown of Japan Studio, and that's still like a bummer to me. I would have loved to see them, change that studio in some way for the better, but that's kind of like the one caveat to Japan Studio, is that a lot of the games they put out, one, didn't sell all that well, so they didn't have that global appeal that Sony's been looking for a long time. But it's just that we've got multiple reports of Japan Studio not being the most fit team when it comes to like working on projects, getting them done in a timely manner. And I believe Alan Becker, before he left Japan Studio and he took over in like the early 2010s, like 2012 or somewhere around there. I think it was near PS4, but he had mentioned that when he got there, it was kind of messy and they had a bunch of projects being worked on and there was like no sense of direction. So his job going there was to like get them in order. And maybe that was largely the reason why he left, because he couldn't really get that to happen by the time that he was at that development studio. But the point is, I guess they weren't fixable, if that makes sense, right? I mean, if there's an ongoing work culture and just a sort of way that the day plays out and the sort of expectations that those staff have when they show up and they start working on this weird project alongside maybe like 10 or 15 others, maybe it's not as easy to come in and sort of, change all that. Perhaps from Sony's point of view, their idea was, well, let's just close it or not renew all those contracts and start from scratch and hire, a world-class team of developers that, and if they are poaching staff from some of these more well-known development teams and publishers like Capcom and Konami, and they're competent and they can put out games on time and they know how to follow a decent they can work with a decent budget and a good timeline, and they can comfortably put out a high quality AAA game every 3-4 years, then that might be what Sony wants to do. And this also vibes with them saying constantly that they're doing acquisitions alongside organic growth, and I feel like people often misconstrue organic growth. That could be expanding a current team or building a new one entirely, which they've done a handful of times in the past. So everything here sounds plausible, especially when the rationale is global appeal. That is what Sony would like nowadays. But these are still very much Japanese developed games, so that could be one way where Sony wants to, because like Astro's great, Gran Turismo's great, but these games, Gran Turismo as a driving simulator, you're either for it or you're not, right? Astro platforming game, it's great, I love it, but there is, I think, there is something missing there, and so it's a rumor, but I could see this happening. We'll keep watching this one. We'll see if anything comes up, which realistically something should, because if they're forming a new team, there should be job listings or some kind of indicators that it will pop up. But if it's happening in Japan, these things tend to go under the radar more easily, so that might be one way where we miss this. But again, we'll see if anything does come up for the time being. Next up, we've got a pretty interesting scenario unfolding here that I did not think was going to happen for this particular franchise, but Death Stranding. So apparently it looks like the second game is in negotiation with Sony right now. what happened here was IGN Brazil had cited an article, or I guess some sort of interview with Adoro Cinema, where Adoro Cinema was speaking with Norman Reedus, the actor in Death Stranding and also The Walking Dead. But in this roundtable, he was asked at some point about a possible sequel for the game or something like that, right? And he responded saying, and I quote, "I think we're doing a second Death Stranding. The game is in negotiations right now, so yay." Here's the thing, I cannot find where this actually links back to. Like, I know it's Adoro Cinema, but I don't know if this is a video interview, some sort of TV interview, or a podcast, or written, or whatever, right? I can't find it exactly. However, the journalist that Norman Reedus spoke to, she's on Twitter, and she did point out, and this is all run through Google Translate, so there might be some meaning lost here, but she says, and I quote, "Now the international press has found me, and I'm hitting with the scoop, and you can be sure it's real. It was Norman who spoke. For those who want to read the original, she links back to the IGN Brazil article." So this is pretty bizarre. I did not think this would be a thing, but it seems like it might actually be happening behind the scenes. Here's the thing, though. Norman can't be talking about the director's cut by mistake because the timing doesn't make sense there. It's already coming, it's public, it's releasing very soon. But when it comes to actors and games, whether they're doing voice talent, mocap, or whatever, I mean, they do know things, but they also don't know things based on the context. And for something like this, where it's a possible sequel, he's not going to be involved in those negotiations, so maybe his manager's feeding him something that's incorrect or what have you, right? But this also goes at complete odds with what we've been hearing about Kojima Productions and them possibly doing a project with Microsoft, some sort of cloud-based game, which, at this point, it seems like a lot of people really dislike that rumor, and I think that's largely just because it's coming from GamesBeat reporter Jeff Grubb, which, I mean, come on, keep in mind, when it comes to Reset Era, 4chan, Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, some random person on Twitter that somehow gets 1,000 retweets for whatever reason, right? We've got all this crazy stuff flying about left and right with leaks and rumors and, a PlayStation event coming every single week throughout summer. I mean, we've got all that junk where most of it's not true, and we've got a handful of people that genuinely oftentimes have very good sources and they're fairly accurate, and Jeff Grubb is one of them. So at least for that rumor, the most recent thing was Kojima signing a letter of intent to make that game, and Microsoft actually hired staff for managing that project. And so it seems like that might happen, but it's not confirmed, of course. It's just that that could be a thing alongside this, right? It's not impossible that we've got two projects happening at the same time, especially if, the other rumor about that cloud-based title is that it's necessarily not like a massive project by any stretch. And so we could have two games going here. Not likely, I would say, but it's possible. And to really go back to this entire thing here of somebody that liked the first game, I would not expect this from either party involved, right? I wouldn't think that Kojima was going to do a sequel, and I wouldn't think that PlayStation would want to sign a second one. So that, if anything, is the most surprising thing to hear about this. However, if it ends up happening, then we'll find out over time. Like, obviously this project would be like 3-4 years away, but we'll get rumors and maybe Norman will slip up, and I think at this point that's sort of what we're waiting for, is something else to leak out about it. Moving on to our next story, this past week we finally found out what's going on inside that new PS5 model, the 1100 series, which I think last week we talked about how it's now shipping in Australia, UK, Japan, but probably everywhere at this point. And the only thing we knew about that console is that it's 300 grams lighter. There's a new screw for the stand to thread in by hand instead of a screwdriver, and then also a new Wi-Fi module, but we didn't know where the 300 grams actually went. Just that the internals in all likelihood were changed in some way, right? That's pretty typical. And courtesy of the YouTuber Austin Evans, he imported a console from Japan and disassembled it, and now we can see what's really going on. So one of the less obvious changes is a new fan, which it looks like it has more blades on it, so in theory that should be pushing more air, which is certainly a welcome change. But once you get further inside the console, down to the motherboard, you can see that the weight was mostly due to a smaller heatsink, and this thing is actually quite small now compared to the previous one, but there's also a massive reduction in copper, and copper has better thermal conductivity, so there's cause for concern that this heatsink is, not doing the job as well as the previous one, right? It seems almost obvious, and that's kind of the conclusion that Austin came to. Part of why he also did thermal imaging on the back of the console to see the heat escaping, and the new one is exhausting about 5 degrees more in Celsius of heat, or about 8 or 9 Fahrenheit, but essentially it's pushing out more hot air. But the conclusion is that, well, if it's pushing out more hot air, possibly it's running hotter inside as well. But that's what's kind of problematic. Like, it's interesting to see the thermal imaging on the back. I mean, we did that at launch for PS5 Series X. I compared it to, PS4 Pro and all that stuff. But that's also because I don't have thermal couplers to measure the actual dies and all the memory modules, which Gamer Nexus did that, and he only found that one module, I think, on the back of the board was running a little bit too hot. But this is what's I guess problematic about how this was put out there, because he titled the video "This PS5 is worse," but there's not really enough there to conclusively say that, other than the obvious things that we can say is that this was a cost reduction for the console. It's very typical. This is what Sony's going to be doing various times over the PS5 life cycle. So to think that, don't think this is our one time where it's getting worse, so to speak. We're going to see various PS5 models, and we're going to see different process sizes for the SoC as well. And that's, I guess, the other point, where it's when we look at all things considered, is this okay for this PlayStation 5 model? Because typically we see a reduction in that process size that goes alongside a power use reduction, or the fan can be changed. All these things kind of go in tandem so the console can comfortably operate smoothly. But the other thing Austin pointed out was, because of PS5's variable frequencies, this could be problematic if it's running hotter. But the problem is, that's not necessarily how it works, where PS5 is operating at the top end almost always, and it dips down during taxing situations or a worst case scenario game or what have you. But the thing is, that's not necessarily tied to the heat of the console, right? This is exactly what Mark Cerny was talking about. It's more so tied to that set power budget that developers have to work with. And remember, the entire premise of this console and sort of the thermals around it were designed to mitigate the problems of PS3 and PS4, where fans would kick in very loudly, and it could be highly dependent on the ambient temperature of the room and things like that. This should not be happening with PS5, even if the console internally is, say, running a bit hotter directly on those dies and the memory and things like that, right? So that's in theory how this console is supposed to work, because Sony has one example chip and an algorithm that they built out for all consoles, regardless of these model variations that we're going to be seeing. In theory, my PS5, which is a launch model, should play games the exact same way functionally and dip in the same scenarios in the same way that any other PS5 that will subsequently release. They're all supposed to play the same, right? So that's just one angle of it. And then also Digital Foundry picked up one of these CFI 1100 models, and they kind of explained, I guess, a lot of what I'm saying. But they're testing so far. They haven't tested the dies or anything like that, but what they're saying is that the fans aren't kicking up in speed. It's the same result, more or less. It's drawing the same power, right? So we've got a few variables so far that are all the same. And Austin also pointed out the new console is a little bit quieter, to which Digital Foundry also mentions if the console is in fact hotter and it needs to be cooled more, the fan is not reflecting that if it's operating at the same speeds, essentially. So I think what we have here is Sony just doing a normal cost reduction, and also realizing that they can get away with removing a large portion of that heatsink, which even when that was introduced and we saw it during the first disassembly, it was comically large. I mean, I think people are really overlooking the fact that Sony over-engineered the cooling around PS5. That was the whole point of this thing, right? With the boost clocks, the set power budget, the liquid metal, the large fan, and also the massive heatsink. I think the company's just realizing they've got a lot of overhead with cooling. That's not to say this isn't a cost reduction, and it's also not to say that Sony's engineers are perfect and they can get away with anything, or that the console is perfectly fine within its set parameters, although you'd certainly hope that that is the case, right? But I think this is just it's fine right now. I wouldn't worry too much about this. Clearly, it seems like the initial things that we're learning is that the console's operating about as normal as the other one did. And if it is pushing out more air in theory, that could mean it's actually cooling better, although that's probably not likely. The point is, there's not really enough here yet to say it is worse, which is like, that's problematic with how Austin put this video out, titling it this PS5 is worse, and then, doing thermal imaging and saying somewhat reasonable things and opinion-based observations, but it's not really conclusive, right? And so that's the one part of it. And I don't know what it is with Austin, but over the years, he's gotten a lot of things wrong about PlayStation games and hardware. I don't know if he's unfamiliar with them or has a bias or whatever. That's fine, but either don't cover the platform or just outline that you don't really know enough about it. Like in that video, he mentioned PS3's got progressively worse, and that's not true in the context of heating and cooling, where, original launch models, yes, they're worse in the semblance of like PS2 support or the extra USB ports and card readers if you really care about that. But in terms of reliability, which we did a maintenance video on a PS3, it's not exactly easy. Those early ones, the CPU and GPU, they run hot, so much that you'll have a yellow light of death issue at some point once they got the process size down from 90 going to 60, then 45. They got significantly better over time, and generally speaking, most consoles do, like from the original Xbox 360 to various models there. And so it's just one of those things, right? But right now, if you're still looking to buy PS5 and you have the opportunity to buy one, I wouldn't stress out maybe ending up with this model in particular. There's just not enough there, and so far it seems like it's about normal. Next up, we have some Naughty Dog news stories, like, for example, this standalone multiplayer project that we've known about for a while, and it's not really like a secret, of course. It's quite public. Naughty Dog's hiring for it, and they're hiring aggressively for it, as noted by one of the game's co-game directors on Twitter, where he says, "We're aggressively hiring. Apply if you want to be a part of bringing the cinematic experience between players in our new standalone multiplayer action game." And they've got a lot of job listings. More than the last time I checked, but associate gameplay scripter, they're still looking for an economy designer, visual effects artist, UI scripter. So it's weird. It almost sounded like for a little bit that this game was maybe in the back half of development, as in like we might get a formal reveal in the next like 6 months, and let's say it's tentatively scheduled for mid to late 2022. But well, you also have to consider that Part 2 launched in late 2019, and that's when they were like already at the home stretch of, trying to get that game out after a few delays, and they already admitted that multiplayer wasn't going to be in there because it was separate and something else entirely, and that's what we have now. But with all the scope creep that this game is now seeing and the way it's sounding with this cinematic experience between players, I'm not a multiplayer guy, but I would still like to see what this looks like, but now it's also sounding like maybe it's further away than we were initially thinking. But we can say that if you're not into multiplayer stuff, which I know a lot of you are, myself included, the one thing is they are still going to do single player content. So as noted recently in a GameInformer interview with the Naughty Dog co-presidents Evan Wells and Neil Druckmann, they were asked directly about, are you going to do more single-player stuff? And Evan Wells says, absolutely, yeah, it's sort of in our DNA to tell these stories. I think it's going to continue. Single-player experiences are near and dear to us. It's what has attracted a lot of people to Naughty Dog, and that's what inspires them. So I think we're going to keep at it as long as we can. And for those interested in maybe a new IP or them revisiting a franchise they've done before, Evan Wells says, I think the answer is both. I think there's excitement to develop new IP, but there is still a ton of love for Uncharted and The Last of Us, and I think you'll see both kinds of projects from us in the future. Now, that's not to say that we're going to get more Uncharted, because he called that out specifically, but it is something where, this is kind of the answer you see from a lot of developers. It really doesn't matter who you're asking. They're always going to say, like, a mix of both. We like to explore new things, but that doesn't rule out all the other old IP that we've done, previously. They kind of dive into this topic further, which it's a good interview. I'll try to link it down below if I remember, but they discuss how when they finish a project, they evaluate and kick around a lot of ideas before settling on something, and it has to be something that the team completely agrees on and they're excited about doing. And Evan also points out, like, his age, right, is like 48, 49, and when you get to that age, there's only a handful of games left that you can do from completion when you're talking about a 3, 4, 5-year development cycle. And that's also something to really consider, and one where I feel like that probably rattles through a lot of developers' heads, is that for the lifetime of like a human being and how long you work, like, you're not really going to be able to ship that many games from start to finish unless you're bouncing around to different studios and kind of jumping in from like the midpoint and then reaching the home stretch, right? It's something that I always wonder, and I'm I'm sure they think about that stuff all the time, but that's the point that they're making here. Naughty Dog's not changing. It's just that this is their first big multiplayer project, and despite not really having an interest, I still want to see what their take is on that genre, or that, you know, that concept and idea of merging a cinematic experience with multiple players. And it's something that I would like to see how they handle it. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week, and our Tuesday video was 2022 PS5 games, at least so far. So right now, because of all the delays, there's a lot of games getting moved to 2022, and we kind of run through all the titles that you should be looking forward to, and you know, that's not even including all the rumors and things like that, like the new games that we don't even really know about just yet from, you know, everybody, right? PS Studios, third party, all that good stuff. So right now it's sounding really good. Go check out that lineup, and then next week we've got the PlayStation 5 Showcase. So we'll probably do some sort of recap and impressions video after the event goes live, and then depending on, you know, what's left for like Let's Talk PlayStation, we might have another conversation the following day or what have you, right? Obviously that's going to be news throughout the week if there is any. It will probably stay quiet, I would think, up until Thursday, but we'll see how that all pans out. Until then, that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Panecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.